Hey Waffle Gang, I do hope you're well. My name is Mark and today we're checking out some more Reddit stories, and if you do love a Reddit story, why not consider hitting that like, subscribe, maybe that notification bell too, and let's crack on with today's first story. Much love, guys. Now, today's first story comes from Janny Jeans. I hope I did pronounce that correctly. It was suggested on Twitter from Donna Glenny, so thank you so much for that. And it's titled, My 23 female parents' 50s are tearing down my treehouse to install a hot tub and gazebo. I know this sounds so childish, but I'm devastated. It was my sanctuary from their constant fighting. How do I deal or convince them not to? First of all, thanks for reading. Secondly, let me apologize for the nature of this post. I know people have real problems out there and mine isn't one of them, but this is deeply affecting me. So, background on my childhood. My parents ran a business together and constantly fought. I mean constantly. The fights would sometimes devolve into physical altercations that were terrifying to me. I was an only child, so I think I'm the only person in the world besides them who knows how bad it actually got. To the outside world, we were a very normal family. When I was 6, my grandpa asked me what I wanted most for my birthday. Even then, I knew I wanted to escape, so I said a treehouse. I helped my grandpa with every single nail in that place, and it became my literal sanctuary when there was the utter chaos in my house. I was in there when it was 100 degrees outside. I was in there when it was below freezing. I painted it every year. I decorated it. I treated it like it was almost a religious retreat for me. I came home every summer from college and cleaned, painted, and even slept in it most of the time. I permanently moved out about a year ago, but I also had fantasies that I could someday introduce my kids to my treehouse someday. In my ultimate pie-in-the-sky dreams, I thought about taking it apart board by board and reassembling it in my own yard. Yesterday, I got an email from my mum. Almost as a footnote, said very casually, "Oh, me and your father are tearing down that old oak tree with your ugly treehouse and finally putting a gazebo with a hot tub. Aren't you excited for us?" My parents always denied how much they scared me when they fought. They also flat out deny that the fights got as bad as they did. Or they say that since they found Christ, the fights and altercations have been forgiven, and I should forgive them too. But I just can't forget, and now threatening to tear down my special space seems like the ultimate admission that either they don't know or just don't care how much they tormented me with their constant battles. I'm crushed over this. Apparently it's coming down Saturday, and I just can't get home to do anything about it. I asked politely if they could try to please save the pieces, and my mum said, "We're hiring labourers. I just don't think they care enough to try." Thanks a lot, Mum. What can I do here? I'm so crushed. Is this just part of growing up and being an adult that I have to deal with? Should I pay over $1,200 for a last-minute ticket tomorrow to try and save as much as I can? And the top comment on this one was from Rodeo Bob, who quotes OP saying, "How far should I go to save it?" Rodeo says, "Not very far," and quotes again saying, "Is this just part of growing up and being an adult that I have to deal with?" Rodeo says, "Yes." And quotes again saying, "Should I pay over $1,200 for a last-minute ticket tomorrow to try and save as much as I can?" Rodeo says, "Good Lord, no." Then OP said, "How do I deal with this?" And Rodeo said 3 things. First, I want you to consider that a big part of what made that treehouse special isn't the tree, or the boards, or the nails. It isn't the color or the decorations, the ropes or ragged curtains. What made that place special was the effort you invested, the memories you have with your grandfather, the memories of cold days and warm nights and sleeping outside. And those things, those feelings and memories will always be yours, untouched and untouchable by anything your parents say or do. Next, I'd like you to build on that idea, that this safe place of happiness existed, not because of a tree or boards or nails, but because of the effort you put in shaping it and caring for it and making it your own. Which means you, your efforts, your passions are the key to making places that feel safe and welcoming in your life. That means that when you have kids, you can build a new treehouse with them, teach them how to paint and nails, and love can create a safe space. And it means that right now, wherever you live, there's a corner or closet or room that you can decorate, invest time and effort and love into to make your own treehouse. Last thought, I promise. You're an adult. You moved away from home, hopefully for good. But obviously, even if you return, it won't be as a child. That's a transformation for you. From dependent child to independent adult. From a kid who is supposed to do what they're told and obey their parents into an adult who is still thoughtful about what their parents say, but does what is in their own heart. Transformations like this are mostly internal things. We don't go from a limb-climbing larva to big-winged butterflies. We still look the same and talk the same and mostly act the same. But this treehouse and the hot tub, that's physical evidence of this transformation. Your parents' house is still a home, but they're no longer full-time parents of a child. Their lives are being transformed as well, and they are remaking their environment to reflect this new reality. You're changing, they're changing, and the relationship between you and your parents will be different too. You're not a child who must live with their parents and needs a shelter. You're an adult who gets to negotiate new boundaries with their adult parents. Take this as a symbol, an omen, and run with it a little. And that comment was pretty much spot on. I think I can totally understand where OP's coming from, especially with the emotional significance of it, the sanctuary that it was to OP, and the way that the parents just have this kind of casual attitude to just destroying it and saying, "Oh, are you not happy for us?" They must have noticed the amount of time, how important it was to OP when they was younger. But like the commenter said, what made that treehouse special was your memories and the efforts and the love that you put into it, which can't be destroyed. That's always yours. You have the skills, the love to turn any space into your own sanctuary. And like with any situation, regardless of what it is, it's okay to grieve that loss and taking the time to process all those emotions that go with it. Totally understood. But OP started their update by saying a huge thank you to everyone, especially Rodeo Bob, the comment that we read, for such thoughtful replies. I didn't specifically follow everyone's advice, but rather sort of piece things together from everyone. So seriously, thank you to everyone. To end story is, I called my mum to please take several pictures of the treehouse for me, from several angles and inside. She was so rude and dismissive and said something along the lines of, "Oh Jenny, we don't have time for that, and you can't expect us to climb up that piece of junk." I was heartbroken all over again, because she was callous. I decided that the only way I was going to have any keepsakes was to fly home and either take pictures myself or save as much of the wood as I could. I bought a really expensive last-minute ticket home. After I'd already paid the ticket, I remembered that maybe my neighbor would be willing to take some pictures for me. They are an elderly couple, but they had almost been like surrogate grandparents. When they were home, they traveled a lot, but Mr. Smith prided himself on being in great shape, so I figured it couldn't hurt to ask them for pictures, just in case I didn't make it home in time. To say it was an odd conversation is an understatement. I'll just type it out to the best of my memory. OP said, "Hi, Mrs. Smith, it's Jenny from next door. Are you guys in town by chance?" Mrs. Smith said, "Jenny, it's so good to hear from you. No, we're at our place in this location. Is there something I can do for you? Is everything okay?" I said, "Well, not really. My parents are tearing down the oak tree with my..." Mrs. Smith said, "What? They're doing what?" OP said, "They're tearing down the oak tree with my treehouse." Mrs. Smith says, "No, they can't do that. That's our oak tree." Tree law, tree law, tree law. OP says, "Well, I think either Friday or Saturday. They're having people over to cut it all down." Mrs. Smith says, "Jenny, I need to make some calls. I'm sorry. I need to let you go. I'll try to call you back." So I flew home early Friday morning. My parents had hired some laborers from Home Depot but weren't home. They were well underway tearing my treehouse down. I approached them and asked if I could pay them to set aside the boards and metal parts and not throw them in the dumpster they had brought. They agreed. And I was able to save almost all the wood in a very neat pile. I even tried to number everything so if I ever do get to rebuild it someday, I know what goes together. It wasn't ideal, but I feel fortunate that I did get to save most of everything. I'd say at maybe 6 p.m. my parents finally showed up, and they were mad as I've ever seen them. They weren't even happy to see me. But it turns out the neighbors had their lawyer issue an injunction against tearing the tree down. I can't even begin to say how angry my parents were, and they didn't even really speak to me to tell me what was going on. So I called Mr. and Mrs. Smith back. It took until Saturday, but finally they called me and told me that basically there had been a surveying mistake when my parents had built their house in the 80s, and the tree had actually been on the Smiths' property the whole time. They told me they always had an uneasy peace with my parents over the error, and had never minded having a treehouse in the tree, but chopping it down was crossing a major line. They said the tree gave them great shade in the summer mornings, and they could not imagine tearing it down for any reason. He asked me what my parents' reasons were, and I told him about the gazebo, and he literally started laughing that my parents had the nerve to knowingly build a gazebo on their property. He said he'd always planned on legally deeding the property over to my parents since there's only about 11-foot error along the property line. But since he thinks my parents purposely waited until he and Mrs. Smith were out of town to rip down the tree, he wasn't in any mood to do them favors. Saturday was so awkward, and I spent the night at a friend's from high school. This morning my dad said he wanted my crap off his property, so I called the Smiths back and they said they didn't mind if I stored my wood in their barn as long as I needed. My parents went to church and I plan on leaving without saying goodbye. That's her memorabilia boxes in the attic. I'm taking them to a friend's house and she's going to ship them to me, so there's nothing left in the house for my parents to take their anger out on. I don't know how this will affect our relationship, but the reality is we haven't had much of one for a long time. I don't have any attachment to my childhood home anymore, so at least in the near term there's nothing for me to really go home to. Thank you to everyone for the advice and giving me some clarity during a really stressful time. I didn't follow most advice, but I did take a little bit from 100 plus responses to work out a decent solution. Thank you again. Damn, so there was some surprise tree lore in this kind of story. And I'm glad that regardless of what was said in the comments, about spending that kind of money on a ticket or whatever, I'm glad OP did get the resolution that was good for them in the end. They've clearly gone through a lot growing up, and that treehouse meant the absolute world to them. And it sounds like they had wonderful neighbors that are being super supportive at the same time. So good on OP. Also, that wonderful comment from Rodeo Bob, that was really thoughtful, wasn't it? But the bloody cheeky parents in this, just gonna chop a tree down that's someone else's. Holy moly. Anyway, now I'm going to turn this one to you guys. What do you guys make of this situation? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below, and let's move on to another story. Now our next story comes from Pixies Love Petals from the Am I the Arsehole Here subreddit, and says, am I the arsehole here for telling my sister's boyfriend to get out after he refused to eat the meal I cooked? So here's what happened. I, 28 female, invited my sister, 25 female, and her boyfriend, 26 male, over for dinner. I love cooking and spent hours preparing this fancy meal. Homemade pasta, a slow-cooked ragu, a salad, and a tiramisu for dessert. I was really proud of it and excited to have them over. When they arrived, everything was fine at first. We sat down and I started serving the food. Her boyfriend, let's call him Steve, stared at the pasta for a moment, then looked at me and said, I don't eat carbs. At first, I thought he was joking, but nope, he was dead serious. He goes on about how he's super into keto, and carbs are the enemy. Okay, fine, that's his choice, but when I offered to make him a salad or something else on the spot, he refused and said I should have known about his diet beforehand. This is where it gets weird. He then pulls out a small Tupperware container from his bag, filled with what looked like boiled chicken and broccoli, and starts to eat it at my dinner table while the rest of us are trying to enjoy the meal I spent hours making. I was stunned and honestly kind of insulted. I told him it was rude to bring his own food without mentioning it to me beforehand, and he should have at least given me a heads up. He then goes off about how people need to respect his dietary choices, and I was being controlling by not accommodating his needs. At this point, I'd had enough. I told him if you can't eat what's served and won't even let me make something else, then maybe you should just get out. He stood up, said something like, I'm just trying to be healthy, grabbed his Tupperware, and walked out. My sister stayed for a bit but eventually left too, saying I overreacted. Now my sister's mad at me, saying I embarrassed her boyfriend and made them both feel unwelcome. My mum thinks I should apologize, but my friends are on my side, saying Steve was being incredibly rude. Am I the arsehole here for telling him to get out? So, Shammy Dammy says your sister didn't give you a heads up about his diet. OP says honestly no, she didn't. I'm not sure if she even knew how serious he was about the whole keto thing because she never mentioned it. She's pretty much anything, so I assumed he was the same. But even if she had, I feel like it still would have been polite for him to at least say something beforehand instead of just showing up with his own meal. I would have happily made something keto friendly if I had known. Rebecca says, they should have given you the heads up when accepting the invite. Even if she didn't know before, he should have said something like, sounds great, does your sister know I'm keto? And all would have been good. Can I also ask how long that chicken has been in his bag getting warm? Snoo Macron says, and still didn't say anything before dinner was served, so let OP waste her time plating his dinner just for him to pull out his tasteless, room temperature meal. Tessie says, my son's girlfriend has a gluten allergy. I know this because my son informed me before I made food for them. My husband's daughter is a vegetarian. My daughter has a milk allergy. I wouldn't know any of this unless someone told me. You aren't a mind reader. And that's exactly it. OP's not a mind reader. Steve would do my nutting. Telling OP you need to respect my dietary choices. Like, how's she meant to respect your dietary choices when she doesn't even know about them? No one seems to know about it. OP even went out of the way to offer a salad. The scenario in my head that I'm envisioning where they're all sat there and this guy, everyone's just chatting, he's refused to eat carbs, he's refused a salad, and then just starts rummaging through his bag to pull out his little Tupperware. Oh God. Bloody hell, Steve. But OP comes in with an update and says, well, y'all, buckle up because things have escalated in a way I never expected. After my initial post, I figured things would calm down once my sister had time to cool off. Spoiler alert, they did not. So the day after I told Steve to leave, my sister texted me saying that they want to talk things through at a family dinner. Oh God. Oh God. I think I can see where this is going, but not sure yet. I assumed it would be just the three of us, maybe at a neutral restaurant, where we could hash it out like adults. Nope, instead, my sister invites my parents, my brother, and Steve's parents to this dinner at my parents' house, turning it into some kind of weird intervention. I show up thinking it'd just be a casual conversation, but the moment I walk in, Steve's mum, let's call her Carol, is already going off about how Steve has always had special dietary needs, and how people who care about him should respect his boundaries. The woman acts like the guy has a life-threatening allergy, not a trendy diet. My mum is sitting there looking super uncomfortable, while my dad's just quietly sipping his beer, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. So Carol starts listing off Steve's dietary restrictions, and she's acting like I've personally offended the whole keto community by serving pasta. Then, brace yourselves, Carol pulls out a folder. Yes, a literal folder with printouts. She hands one to me, one to my mum, and one to my dad. I'm flipping through this thing, and it's full of Steve's dietary guidelines, suggested meal plans, and even a list of keto-friendly restaurants we could go to in the future. At this point, I'm doing everything I can not to laugh, but it gets worse. Steve pipes up and says he's willing to forgive me for disrespecting his lifestyle if I agree to host a redo dinner where I follow his dietary restrictions to the letter. He says this will prove I'm serious about making amends and respecting his needs going forward. I thought he was joking, but no, he was dead serious. He even pulled out his phone to show me some keto recipe apps that I might find helpful. I was in total shock. My sister, by the way, said absolutely nothing during all of this, just staring at her plate like she wanted to disappear. My mum, bless her, tries to smooth things over by suggesting we all just eat whatever we want when we're together, but Carol snaps. It's not that simple. She says that in their family, they all follow keto together, and that's why Steve is so passionate about it. At this point, I've had enough. I stood up and said, look, I'm not redoing the dinner. I'm not making anyone a special keto feast. If Steve can't eat what I cook, that's fine, but bringing his own meal to my dinner without even telling me was disrespectful, and I'm not apologizing for feeling that way. And then, this is where it gets absolutely bonkers, Steve's dad stands up, points at me and says, this is exactly why Steve doesn't trust women to understand him. They always make it about themselves. The whole room went silent. My dad finally spoke up saying, I think it's time for you all to leave, and started walking towards the door, basically escorting Steve's parents out. Steve and my sister stayed behind, but Steve was furious. He started yelling about how families should support each other, and then accused me of trying to sabotage their relationship because I'm jealous of what they have. At that point, I just walked out and left the whole mess behind. Here's the kicker though. A couple of days later, my sister called me and told me she and Steve were taking a break because she needed time to think. Apparently, this whole keto fiasco was the last straw in a long list of controlling behavior from Steve. She didn't realize just how bad it was until the whole family saw it play out at dinner. She even told me that Steve had been trying to get her to follow his diet for months, but she was hiding snacks in her car just to get a break from all the keto madness. So now, Steve's gone full radio silent. My sister is staying with me for the time being, and I'm still getting passive-aggressive texts from Carol about how hurt Steve is and how he's just misunderstood. Honestly, I'm just glad my sister is finally seeing how controlling this guy was. Where were the adults, says to OP. I'm glad your sister is realizing what an arsehole she was dating. Tell her to stand by for the love bombing as Steve tries to worm his way back in. As for this Carol who thinks she's the queen bee, a nice text saying, you have absolutely zero input in how I live my life, and a block on all channels is in order. Support your sister and do your best to remove her from this train wreck of a family. Another commenter says, just a he does not matter enough for me to change a single thing, bye would do. Beth says, OP should just text mummy. You're both as delulu as each other, stay away from us. Then block and live your life in carb-loving bliss. Ad Accomplished says, this is what happens when a kid with helicopter parents grows up. I'd have had trouble not laughing in his face. Actually, no, I would have just laughed in his face. A lot of my friends have tried specialty diets. They let me know about them, and I'm never douchey about it. Steve is damaged goods. His mum broke him, and he will never recover. The whole situation is just batshit crazy. Not the whole keto thing and different diets. I know many people that do different diets. I got nothing against that at all, but like mummy turning up with the folder and bringing a folder out and while this is happening, Steve's just sitting there staring at it, like just sort of nodding along. That's my folder. That's my folder with recipes. Like the mum's just giving over the instructions to look after the family pet while they go on holiday or something. It's just weird. But what do you guys make of this situation? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. And just a huge thank you for being here today, for getting involved in the stories, your love, your support, your time. We even had a little bit of tree lore today. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Take care and much love. Tree lore, tree lore, tree lore.